I was 13 years old when it happened. My name is Nina Carver, and I had just gotten out of the car for what I thought was a food stop. It wasn't anything unusual. My stepdad, Miles, had pulled off the highway, claiming we were just going to stretch our legs for a few minutes at a gas station. My mom, Claire, had barely looked at me as she fumbled with her purse, her focus entirely on the radio. Lara, my half-sister, chewed a straw in the back seat, eyes glued to her phone. The air felt crisp, and I remember wondering if we'd be back on the road in time to catch the sunset. "Hey, Nina," Miles said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Take a break. I'll be back in 10. I glanced at him, unsure of what he was implying. "Here." He handed me a $20 bill, like it was some sort of peace offering. "What's this for?" I asked, confused. "You'll be fine. I'll be back in 10, he repeated, like the words held some kind of magic. He gave me a tight, almost forced smile and slammed the car door behind him. My mom didn't say a word. She didn't even look at me, just stared out of the passenger window, her fingers tapping nervously on her lap. I glanced over at Lara, but she didn't seem to notice either. She just chewed on her straw, staring ahead. I stood there for a second, holding the $20, trying to make sense of what was happening. It didn't feel right. "Hey, Mom," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are we—" "Just stay here for a bit," she muttered, finally glancing at me, her face impassive. "We'll be back soon." The words hung in the air, but my gut told me something wasn't right. Something about the way she said it. Distant, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. A few minutes passed, then 10. I looked at my watch, then another 10. I felt it, an unease building up in my chest, tightening with each passing minute. I went inside the gas station for a drink, trying to ignore the feeling that something was off. My reflection in the cool glass of the refrigerated drinks section seemed strange, like I was seeing myself from a distance. When I came back out, there was no car in sight. Just the buzzing lights of the gas station and the sound of distant traffic. My breath caught in my throat. The lump in my stomach grew, and I stood frozen in the parking lot holding the $20, feeling the cold start to creep in. It was starting to rain, and I could see the headlights of a truck getting closer, but no sign of my family. I waited. Hours passed. I didn't know how long I had been standing there, but when a police officer finally approached, his face lined with concern, I realized something. They weren't coming back. "Kid, are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. I just stared at him, feeling the weight of what had happened hit me in waves. No, I wasn't all right. I hadn't been all right for a long time. I was alone. That was the moment I realized they were gone for good. Miles, my mom, Lara, they were all gone. And I was left with nothing but a $20 and a deep, aching emptiness that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I never looked for them again. I couldn't, not after that. Years passed, and the pain of that night slowly faded into the background, buried beneath layers of new experiences, new betrayals, and an ever-growing determination to never be caught off guard like that again. But that night at the gas station, those hours alone, waiting, abandoned, never truly left me. Now, I was Nina Carver, 30 years old, an elite investigator for a covert aerospace defense agency. My name had been scrubbed from the records, erased as if I'd never existed. But I had built myself up, from the ground up, with nothing but sheer will and a relentless need to prove my worth. I was good at my job, really good. I had a reputation for digging deep, for finding answers where others failed. But as I sat in my small, windowless office surrounded by stacks of classified files, something gnawed at me. Something that didn't belong, a thread I couldn't let go of. It was a report, a cadet file that shouldn't have existed anymore, a file with my name on it. I frowned as I opened the file, the strange feeling of familiarity creeping over me. The folder was marked terminated, the standard red stamp they used when someone didn't make the cut. But as I read further, something didn't sit right. My file wasn't just terminated, it was erased, gone. And it wasn't just a matter of paperwork. It was something more insidious. My entire service record had been wiped clean. I could feel the cold creeping up my spine as I scanned the pages. The signature at the bottom of my termination notice was familiar. Miles Carver. Miles. The name sent a jolt of anger through me as I stared at the paper, my pulse quickening. My stepfather, the man who had abandoned me when I was 13, had signed this. He had erased me. He had erased my entire existence in the military, wiped away my potential, my career, all for what? Because I wasn't good enough for him? I slammed my fist against the desk. What the hell did he do to me? I had been a promising cadet, the youngest in my class, with a mind for strategy that was unparalleled. But it wasn't just about the military. This was about something deeper, something that went beyond the typical bureaucratic mess. I dug deeper, pulling up all the records I had access to. Every email, every audit, every piece of correspondence tied to my termination. As I sifted through the pages, the pattern began to form. Not only had my record been erased, but someone had actively gone back and made sure no trace of me was left. It wasn't just the military that wanted to bury me, it was something far more powerful. Someone had been systematically covering their tracks, deleting everything tied to Nina Carver. A name appeared over and over in the background of the files. Strategic Doctrine Board. It was a group I'd only heard of in passing. The elite, the untouchable. I narrowed my eyes. This wasn't just about a stepfather trying to control me. This was far bigger than that. Someone had orchestrated my downfall. I wasn't going to let this slide. I needed answers. But I wasn't going to find them here. Not without going off the grid. Not without stepping outside the system. I clicked open a new window and made the call that would set everything in motion. It rang a few times before the voice on the other end picked up. "Warren," I said, voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I need your help." Warren had been a records clerk at the base where I trained. A quiet, no-nonsense guy who had always kept his head down. But when I'd been discharged, he'd helped me a few times with off-the-books access to certain files. We weren't supposed to be talking anymore, but I knew he was my only way in. "Warren," I repeated, "I need to know who flagged my file. I need to know who deleted it. This isn't just some standard procedure, it's a cover-up, it's personal." There was a long pause before he answered. "Are you sure about this, Nina? It's dangerous. You've got no idea who you're dealing with." "I've got no choice," I said, my voice tight. "I need to know what happened to me. I need to know what Miles did." Warren was silent for a few more seconds before he finally spoke. "I'll send you the logs, but be careful. This goes higher than you think." I hung up and sat back in my chair, the weight of his words settling over me like a heavy blanket. I didn't know what I was about to uncover, but I knew one thing. It was going to change everything. The next few days were a blur of late-night hacking, stolen access points, and whispers in dark corners. What I found would haunt me forever. The records Warren sent over weren't just about me. They were about a system, the system, that had been erasing people like me for years. And at the top of it all, Miles. It wasn't just that he had erased me from the military records. It was that he had taken others too. Other young, talented individuals who didn't fit his vision of the world. He had built a network of erased identities, each one carefully buried, replaced with those who would carry on his twisted agenda. But there was one thing that stood out above everything else. Lara. My sister, the one who had been raised in the same house as me, the one who had watched as I disappeared from their lives. Lara's name kept showing up in these files. Not just as a bystander. No, she had been involved. She had helped cover up the truth. She had watched as I was erased, and she had done nothing. The betrayal felt like a punch to the gut. My own sister. But it was bigger than just family. This was systemic. This was a game of power, and I was just one of the pieces they had discarded. I would make them all pay for what they did, and I would start with the Strategic Doctrine Board. I had just begun to make my move. This was only the beginning. It took days, but I finally got what I needed. A small breakthrough that felt like a crack in the dam. The documents Warren had sent me weren't just logs and deleted files. They were something more. The blueprint of an entire system designed to erase people, to wipe out their very existence if they weren't useful anymore. And somewhere in the middle of it, I found a pattern, a web I could unravel. The deeper I dug, the more names I found, each one tied to a file with a pattern I was beginning to recognize. Officers, scientists, engineers, all erased, all tied to the Strategic Doctrine Board. But the more disturbing part was the names that didn't belong in this system. I sat in my cramped apartment, the dim light from the terminal flickering across my face, a full pot of cold coffee beside me. My fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as I searched for more connections, more dots to connect. Each file I accessed felt like I was getting closer to the heart of something much bigger. And the more I uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a military cover-up. This was a political power grab. A methodical, systematic removal of people who could stand in the way. One name stood out among the others. Lara. I felt my pulse quicken as I clicked into the file. My half-sister. The one who had always been a distant shadow in my life. until I found out that she was now at the top of the command chain, the face of the new elite in the system. And that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was that her success, the rise in the military ranks, her reputation as a brilliant strategist, had all come at my expense. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. I didn't need to read anymore. I had already pieced it together. My own work, the reports I had written, the strategic doctrine I had spent years developing, the work I had poured my heart and soul into, it wasn't just gone. It had been stolen, word for word, republished under Lara's name. She wasn't just living my life, she was profiting off it. The cold anger that had been simmering inside me for years boiled over. I thought I had been prepared for this, but the betrayal cut deeper than I ever could have imagined. I had been nothing more than a ghost in my family's eyes, someone to disappear, someone to be erased. But now I was done being silent, done being the invisible sibling. It was time to make them see me. I turned to the next step, Jules. Jules was an old friend, a hacker who had gotten in deep with the military tech world before he burned out. We had worked together once, years ago, when I was still trying to make my way up in the ranks. He was a genius, the kind of person who could break into the most secure systems without a second thought. But Jules was also a little too unpredictable for my taste. Still, I needed him. I needed someone who could break into the Strategic Doctrine Board's encrypted network. And I knew Jules could do it, if I could convince him. I pulled up his contact info. It had been years since we last spoke, but I knew where to find him. I sent him a simple message. I need your help. Strategic Doctrine Board. Don't ask questions. Meet me tonight. The response came almost immediately. You've got balls, Nina. I'll be there, but I'm gonna need a drink first. I smiled. No matter how far we drifted apart, some things never changed. That night, we met at a dive bar on the outskirts of the city. Jules was exactly how I remembered him. Rumpled shirt, dark circles under his eyes, but that sharp intelligence still there in his gaze. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. All right, Carver, he said, sitting down across from me. What's this about? What's the play? I need you to help me get into the Doctrine Vault, I said, my voice steady. I need access to their records, specifically the files on the redactions. I'm looking for a trail. Jules raised an eyebrow. The Doctrine Vault? That's the Holy Grail, Nina. You know that, right? If you get caught, they'll... I know the risks. I cut him off. But it's not just about me anymore. It's about them. It's about what they've done. His eyes narrowed. He didn't ask for details. He already knew this was personal. He leaned back in his seat, swirling his drink. Fine, you want the redactions? I can get you that. But you owe me, big time, and I'm not talking money. Deal, I said, not even hesitating. Just get me the access. I'll handle the rest. He grinned, a wicked spark in his eyes. This is gonna be fun. Back at my apartment, Jules worked his magic. I paced back and forth, feeling the weight of time pressing down on me. What I was about to do wasn't just about revenge. It was about restoring something. My work, my identity, and taking back what was stolen. Hours passed, and then Jules finally gave me the signal. I was in. I sat down at my terminal, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The vault system was as tight as they came, but I had seen this kind of code before. This wasn't the first time I'd been this deep into enemy territory. I clicked in. Every keystroke sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I was in the system, and now the truth was within reach. Got it, I muttered to myself, pulling up the files I needed. One by one, I downloaded the redacted logs, the emails, the memos, all of them buried in layers of encryption, but there was more. There was always more. I scrolled through file after file until I hit something that made my blood run cold. A name appeared, Lara Carver, and underneath her name, a report that had been credited to her, a combat strategy that had been lauded as groundbreaking. I opened it, and I wasn't surprised. It was my work. My reports, my strategy, my doctrine, everything I had written as a cadet, all of it, republished under Lara's name. A match. A perfect 92%. She didn't just steal my life, she made it hers. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, my mind racing. There was no going back now. I was going to expose this. I was going to make them see who I really was. I knew what I had to do, but first I had to make sure they couldn't hide anymore. I opened a new file and typed out a simple command. Protocol drift activated. The system didn't crash, it didn't fail, it updated. And with that, my name, the name they had erased, flashed across the screen. I was back. The Global Defense Summit was a room full of high-ranking officials, strategists, and military officers from every corner of the world. I had never imagined myself being part of it, but now, here I was. The stage had been set, and for the first time in years, I was ready to step into the light. But this wasn't just about making an appearance. This was about making them listen. I had planned my speech carefully. Every word, every pause, every gesture was meant to hit them with the truth they had tried so hard to bury. The plan was simple: to expose the theft, to make them all see what had been done to me, and how it reflected the entire system of manipulation and control that had shaped their doctrines. But I wasn't just going to point fingers, I was going to show them. The summit hall was massive, its sleek modern walls lined with rows of sharp-suited leaders, their eyes trained on the stage. I stood there in front of them, an unfamiliar feeling of calm settling over me. The projector on the far side of the room flickered to life, and my screen filled the giant wall with the first document, a report, one of many I had recovered, but this one was significant. It was the document that had been credited to Laura Carver, the one that had been lauded as her groundbreaking work, the one she had taken from me. I stood at the podium, the mic in my hand steady, my voice clear and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, looking out over the crowd, letting my words hang in the air for a moment. "You've all heard of the Carver Doctrine, haven't you? The strategy that's shaped our defense plans for the last 15 years? A murmur ran through the crowd. They knew exactly what I was talking about. The Carver Doctrine was one of the most celebrated combat strategies in recent history, credited to Laura Carver, the golden child of the defense world. But the truth was, it wasn't hers. It was mine. Every single word, every decision, every movement in that document had been lifted directly from my work. And now, I was going to make them see it." I clicked the remote in my hand, and the next slide appeared, a side-by-side comparison. The original memos I had written as a cadet, the ones Laura had plagiarized, the ones she had stolen. "Here, we see the early drafts of what became the Carver Doctrine," I continued, pacing slowly across the stage, my voice carrying through the quiet hall. "This," I pointed at my memos, "was written by me years ago as part of my strategic training. But it was never credited, it was never even acknowledged. It was buried until it resurfaced almost verbatim under a different name, a different face." I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. I could feel the eyes of the audience on me, some confused, others suspicious. But I was prepared for this. I wasn't going to stop until they understood. "The Carver Doctrine is, in fact, the Rivers Doctrine," I said, my voice gaining strength, pushing the words out with purpose. "A doctrine that was built not by Laura Carver, but by someone who was erased from history. A name you should know, Nina Carver." I watched their faces shift. Some expressions of disbelief, others of recognition. Laura's name was well known, respected. My name, gone, forgotten. But now it was coming back. I was forcing them to acknowledge me. I clicked the remote again, and the screen behind me flashed with more slides. Syntax maps, strategy simulations, field notes, all of it matching. Every document a direct copy of what I had written years before. I looked out at the crowd, my eyes scanning the room. The silence was deafening. "You see, this isn't just about my work," I said, my voice unwavering. "This is about a system that erases people, that decides whose contributions matter and whose don't. I was taken out of the equation, my name wiped from the records, while others took credit. And this, ladies and gentlemen," I gestured toward the slide showing the timeline of my erasure. "This is the result. A career built on the work of those who were silenced, buried under the weight of bureaucracy." I could see the murmurs rippling through the room. Some faces were flushed with embarrassment, others grim with realization. But no one spoke. No one knew what to say. Because deep down, they all knew I was right. And then, the last slide came up. The final blow. The comparison wasn't just about doctrine. It was about authorship. My name had been erased from the credits of every key military document, every strategic paper, every influential speech. And instead, Laura's name had been written in bold letters, the star of the defense world. "It's not just about one person's work being stolen," I said, taking a deep breath, the final piece of my plan falling into place. "It's about a pattern that's been happening for years. People like me pushed aside, erased, so that people like her could rise to the top." There it was, my name, once forgotten, now plastered across the screen. I could feel a shift in the air, a change in the way they looked at me. There was a quiet, uncomfortable tension in the room. They didn't know how to respond. Because for the first time, the truth was laid bare. But I'm not asking for their recognition, I continued, my tone sharp. I'm not asking for their approval. What I'm asking for is simple accountability. For every person whose name has been erased, for every contribution that was stolen, and for the system that lets it happen without a second thought. I stepped back from the podium, letting the silence hang for a moment, letting my words sink in. I wasn't just exposing the military's corruption, I was exposing their complacency, their willingness to look the other way. I wasn't just a ghost anymore, I was visible, and they couldn't ignore me now. The invitation had come 2 days after my keynote speech at the summit, the one where I had laid bare the stolen legacy, the one that had made the entire room uncomfortable. My name, Nina Carver, had been forced back into the light, and it seemed that now they couldn't ignore me. Dinner at the Carver home was a carefully curated affair, just like everything else in my old life. The table was set with fine china, the wine glasses gleaming in the low light of the chandelier. There were family photos on the walls, pictures of Laura in uniform, smiling with medals, holding awards. And then, there was me. Not a single picture, not a single memory of my existence in this house. Just the shiny image of the perfect family with the perfect daughter, Laura. My mom, Claire, had made the call to invite me back. She hadn't even bothered to mention the keynote speech I'd given, nor the fallout from the summit. She had kept it businesslike, as if nothing had changed. But I knew better. Laura's face was cold as she greeted me at the door, her smile tight, as if she was forcing it. Miles didn't even acknowledge my presence. He was too busy pouring a glass of wine and discussing the latest developments in his military strategy with some old family friends. The room was full of carefully crafted politeness, as if we were all actors in a play. Laura, the shining star, Miles, the untouchable patriarch, and me, the long-forgotten daughter. I couldn't stop the bitterness from rising. All these years, I had been nothing but a shadow in their eyes. But tonight, things were different. Tonight, I was here to dismantle the illusion. We sat down at the table, and I could already tell that the tension in the air was palpable. My mom smiled at me, but it was a smile that barely reached her eyes. She was too busy pretending that everything was fine to see the damage she'd caused over the years. Laura picked at her food, her jaw clenched. She didn't say anything, but I could see the wheels turning in her mind. The lies she had been living with, our family's lies, were crumbling. And now, I was going to make her face it. The conversation drifted, casual at first. We talked about work, about the weather, about my mom's gardening hobby, but I could feel the quiet undercurrent of tension, like everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I waited for the right moment. It came when my mom casually mentioned how proud she was of Laura for landing a new contract with a top defense firm, how she had been working on an important new project, and how everyone in the military was talking about it. Must be nice, I said suddenly, my voice breaking the silence. To get ahead without having to actually do anything. My mom blinked, confused. Miles didn't even look up from his glass of wine. Laura's grip on her fork tightened, but she stayed quiet. The tension in the room thickened. It was time. I mean, isn't that how it works? I continued, my voice calm, almost casual. You steal someone else's work, take credit for it, and everyone pats you on the back. I looked straight at Laura. Her face went pale, her hand shaking slightly as she put the fork down. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice shaking, though she tried to mask it with anger. Don't play dumb, Laura, I said, keeping my tone steady. You've been riding my coattails for years. The Carver Doctrine, that's my work, not yours. You didn't earn any of it. You plagiarized it, and now you're sitting at the top of the defense world, all while I was erased from history. There was a long, heavy silence. The weight of my words hung in the air, suffocating any pretenses of civility. Laura's eyes narrowed. You're crazy, she spat. You're crazy if you think anyone would believe you. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a sharp screech that cut through the tension in the room. I could feel the heat in my chest rising, the years of anger and resentment bubbling to the surface. You think you can just erase me? I said, my voice rising. You think you can take everything from me and just get away with it? Well, I'm not your shadow anymore. You're not the shining star of this family. You're a fraud, Laura, a fraud, and everyone is going to know it. The words echoed in the room. I didn't look at anyone. I kept my eyes on Laura. The room was dead silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning, but the moment felt like it had stretched out for hours. Do you even hear yourself? She snapped. standing up suddenly, her face flushed with rage. "You always were the screw-up. No one ever cared about you. All you ever did was take from us, and now you're trying to ruin everything I've worked for." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "What work? You didn't work for anything. You're standing on a pile of stolen dreams, Lara. And I'm going to make sure the world knows exactly who you are." My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Nina, please, this isn't the time." "Oh, I think it is," I interrupted, cutting her off. "Because you've never said anything before. You've sat there silent while all this was happening. You let it happen. You let him do it. You let Miles erase me from existence. You let her steal my future. And now you're going to sit here and act like everything's fine?" Claire recoiled, the hurt in her eyes flickering for a moment before she quickly masked it with a look of cold indifference. Lara took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but her eyes were wild. "You're not going to get away with this, Nina. You think anyone's going to believe you? You think they'll care?" I shook my head, my voice low. "Oh, they already care. You're going to see it. The moment I expose you for what you are, for what you've done." I turned on my heel, ready to leave. But as I walked toward the door, I heard my mother's voice, weak and broken, from behind me. "I never wanted this, Nina," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I never wanted any of this to happen." I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I wasn't interested in her apologies anymore. I didn't need her pity. "Then maybe you should have done something about it," I said quietly, my back to them. "You should have stopped him. You should have stopped her. But now it's too late." I walked out the door and I didn't look back. Not once. I had made my move, but I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The Carver name had been twisted into something else over the years, an illusion of strength, of influence, but the truth was finally coming to light. The doctrine had been plagiarized, my life had been erased, and it wasn't just a family betrayal anymore. This was systemic. I had to dig deeper, push further, until everything came crashing down. I sat in front of my laptop, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the room. Jules had come through for me. His access to the Doctrine Vault had given me a foothold, a way into the deepest levels of classified records. Now I was going to find the smoking gun, the one thing that would make them all understand how far this went. Jules had been able to bypass the Vault's basic encryption protocols, but there was still one final layer I needed to get through, the backup system, the one that kept old versions of the doctrines in case of a system failure. I had been working on that for hours, my eyes dry and red from staring at the screen, but I was close. The backup was the key. If I could get into it, I'd find the trail that would prove once and for all that Lara hadn't just stolen my work. She had been part of a much bigger scheme. I took a deep breath, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The system was glitching, but it wasn't anything I couldn't handle. With a few keystrokes, I bypassed the final layer, and the screen flickered as I was granted access. A vast archive of files appeared. For a second, I just stared at it, my heart pounding. The years of effort, the countless hours I'd put in to understand this system were paying off. Every file in front of me was like a puzzle piece waiting to be connected, but I wasn't here for the small stuff. I was here for the big one. I sorted through the files, finding what I needed, backup files, and opened them. There, at the top of the list, was the golden file, the one that could destroy everything, the Strategic Doctrine Redactions Log. It was the list of every change, every edit, every piece of data that had been erased or altered within the Doctrine archives. And at the top of the list was a date, 2007, the year my file had been terminated, the year they'd erased me. I clicked on the file, watching the contents load, the page after page of changes, deletions, and adjustments. Then I saw it, a signature. Miles Carver, he did this. The realization hit me like a cold slap across the face. He didn't just erase me from the family. He had erased me from the records, scrubbed my name from the military's history, and used his connections to cover his tracks. But that wasn't all. I kept scrolling, my hands trembling. The next entry was a file, unauthorized file access logs. And there in the records was a familiar name, Lara Carver. She had accessed my file too, multiple times, and every time it had been flagged. She had been involved in this. She wasn't just a passive participant, she had been complicit in the erasure. I sat back in my chair, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. Lara had known. She had seen the files, watched as they destroyed my career, and had kept quiet. She had helped him, her own father, suppress the truth. I couldn't stay calm. I had to do something. I had to act before they covered their tracks again. I pulled out my phone and called Jules. He picked up on the second ring. "Jules, I need you to access something else for me," I said, my voice tight. "It's time to get the real proof." "What now?" Jules asked, his voice sounding half amused. "Everything. The redacted files, the access logs, everything connected to Lara and Miles. I want it all, and I want it fast." "On it," he said, already sounding like he was back in the zone. I hung up and sat in silence for a moment, staring at the files on my screen. This was it. This was the last piece of the puzzle. If I could get the full picture, I could bring them all down. Lara, Miles, the entire network they built over the years. The next few hours were a blur of code and files, more technical than I had ever imagined. But I had to push through. When Jules called me back, his voice was electric with excitement. "I got everything," he said, a hint of awe in his voice. "You were right. This isn't just a family cover-up. This is huge. There's a whole network of redactions, people whose careers were scrubbed, erased, just like yours." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. "How far does it go?" "I'm still piecing it together, but I've seen enough. You're not the only one." There are dozens of names here, including people who are still working in high-level positions. Some of them are linked to the Strategic Doctrine Board, others to military intelligence. The depth of this goes all the way to the top. A chill ran down my spine. So this is bigger than just my family. This is a full-scale operation. "Bigger than that," Jules confirmed. "This is about control, about keeping certain people in power while pushing the others out of the picture." I could feel the weight of his words settling in. I had been just one casualty in a much larger game. "I'm sending you everything now," he added, his tone shifting. "You need to make your next move quickly. This stuff? It's going to raise some serious alarms. They're going to notice it." "I don't care," I said, standing up from the chair. "It's time they paid for what they did." I knew what I had to do. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to take everything they'd built and tear it apart. It was time for the world to see the truth. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to hide anymore. And I wasn't going to stop until I brought them all down. The sun had barely set when I sat down at my desk, my fingers already itching to type. The files Jules sent were sitting open on my screen, each one more damning than the last. I could feel the weight of what I was about to do, and I couldn't help but feel a small thrill. I wasn't just about to expose them. I was about to take everything they'd built, every lie they told, and make the whole world see it for what it truly was. I had activated Protocol Drift, the audit trigger I'd helped design years ago, back when I thought I was just working for the system. Now, I was using it to tear it down. The system was designed to flag any inconsistencies, any irregularities in the records. And right now, I was about to create a massive one. I took a deep breath, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The screen in front of me was quiet, but I knew that wouldn't last long. The moment I hit enter, the system would begin to ping all across the military's review boards, auditing the doctrines and personnel files, tracking every unauthorized access, every tampered record. I clicked the button. The system didn't crash, it didn't even hesitate. In a few seconds, I watched as dozens of alerts started lighting up the terminal in front of me. Each alert was a flag raised by the system, a marker that something was wrong. It wasn't just my name anymore. It was dozens of names. Names that had been buried. Names that had been erased just like mine. The echoes of my own work, hidden under layers of bureaucracy and deception, were being pulled to the surface. As the logs continued to fill up with flagged entries, I felt the surge of power that came with knowing I was in control of this moment. They couldn't hide anymore, but there was more. Something I had been hoping for, something I knew would push them to the edge. The first red flag pinged. It wasn't an audit alert, it was an override, a massive, glaring override, linked directly to Miles Carver, my stepfather. He had used his clearance to shut down access to my file, to delete records, to bury me completely. But that wasn't the worst of it. The override was dated 2007, the year everything changed, the year I was erased. I opened the entry, my heart pounding as I saw the details. It wasn't just a random deletion. Miles had manually overridden dozens of records, making sure every trace of me was gone. He had accessed my file multiple times, each time covering his tracks more carefully, making sure no one could see what he had done. I leaned in closer, fury rising in my chest as I clicked through the entries. There was no denying it. The man who had raised me, the man who had stood in as a father figure, had systematically erased me from existence, right in front of my eyes. All this time, I thought it was a personal betrayal. But it wasn't just that. It was political. He had done this because I was a threat, because I could see the cracks in the system. I exhaled sharply, clicking through to the next set of files. This time, it wasn't just about me. It was about the people he had erased for me. People who had worked alongside me in the same programs, only to vanish without a trace. I found the name of one officer, a brilliant strategist I'd worked with years ago. They had been cut from the record, just like me. And then I found something else, a name I wasn't expecting to see. Laura Carver. She had been flagged, not for any of the work she had supposedly done on the Carver Doctrine. No, Laura's name was flagged for unauthorized access. She had been accessing files she wasn't cleared for, manipulating documents to push herself further up the ranks. I clicked through the file, scanning it quickly. The red flags were all there. Laura had been tampering with records, modifying doctrines, adjusting strategic plans, all in a bid to take credit for the work that had been mine. But she wasn't just covering for herself. She was covering for Miles, erasing anything that linked us back to the truth. I felt a surge of satisfaction in the pit of my stomach. This was it. This was what I had been looking for. Proof. I took a deep breath and opened the final file, the one that had been my trump card all along. It was the list of all personnel who had been erased. I scrolled through the entries, my eyes darting from name to name, and then there it was, at the very bottom of the list. A name that wasn't mine, but that had been linked to mine in the records. Laura Carver. It wasn't just that she had stolen my work. She had used her access to wipe out the very people who had helped me. She had erased the entire team, making sure no one could see the contributions of those who had worked behind the scenes, all to elevate herself. I was done. I had everything I needed. It was time to take this to the world. I stood up, pacing around the small room. My heart was racing. I could feel the pressure building, the realization of what I was about to do settling in. I wasn't just going to expose my family. I was going to expose the system, the lies, the manipulation. I wasn't just an investigator anymore. I was a whistleblower. I grabbed my phone and typed out a simple message to Jules. It's time. Get ready. Then I took a deep breath, collected the files, and prepared to send them out. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about making sure everyone saw the truth. The whole world needed to know what they had done. The system had been broken for far too long, and now it was going to be fixed. I clicked the send button. The days after the files went public were a blur of media chaos, security breaches, and endless calls from people who once thought I was invisible. My phone rang off the hook. Journalists, military officials, even former colleagues who had long since vanished into the folds of secrecy. They were all reaching out now, scrambling to make sense of the revelations. But I didn't have the time to entertain them. I had bigger plans. I spent most of those days holed up in my apartment, sifting through the fallout, trying to keep control. But control was slipping through my fingers as the media storm built to a crescendo. The expose had caught fire faster than I had anticipated. The public was furious. Miles was under investigation, as was the Strategic Doctrine Board. And Laura? Well, she had gone quiet, disappearing into whatever shadowy corner she had crawled into. But what really weighed on me was the quiet aftermath. After all the noise and the pressure, there was nothing but silence from the people who should have been there from the start. My family, my mother, my stepfather, and my sister were in hiding, trying to piece together their shattered world. It was only a matter of time before I would face them. And this time, it would be different. I wasn't going to hold back. I couldn't. The invitation came a few days later, just as I was preparing for my next move. A text from Laura. It was simple, almost dismissive. Come to the house. We need to talk. It took everything in me not to let the anger boil over. I knew exactly what it meant. A family dinner, a calm plea for reconciliation, and probably an attempt to guilt trip me into backing down. But I wasn't backing down, not anymore. I didn't reply to her message immediately. I didn't need to. I knew what I was walking into. When I arrived at the Carver house, the usual air of privilege greeted me. The place was as pristine as ever, practically untouched by the storm I had unleashed. As I walked through the front door, the tense silence of the room struck me first. My mother, Claire, was sitting in the living room, her posture straight and stiff. Miles, as usual, was in his chair, his face expressionless. Laura was pacing near the window, her phone in her hand, her movements tight with stress. The moment I stepped inside, all eyes turned to me. For a split second, no one said anything. It felt like the room was holding its breath, waiting for someone to break the tension. Lara was the first to speak. "Nina," she said, her voice clipped, "we didn't want it to go this far, but you had to make it public, didn't you?" I didn't flinch. "I didn't want it to go this far either," I replied, my voice steady, "but you forced my hand. What were you expecting me to do when I found out everything you've been hiding?" Lara's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand," she began, her voice rising slightly. "This isn't just about you. This is about the system, about keeping things running smoothly. Do you really think anyone would have believed you over me? Over Miles?" I stood still, the weight of her words washing over me like a slap. "You've been living a lie," I said quietly but firmly. "And now everyone is seeing it. They're going to see what you've done." Lara took a step closer, her face contorting with a mix of frustration and anger. "You're not going to get away with this, Nina. You think the public's going to care? You think the military's going to take you seriously?" "I already did get away with it," I said, meeting her gaze directly. "The truth is out there now. People are already listening. They care." Miles stood up slowly from his chair, his hand tightening around the armrest. His usual control, that cold composure, was slipping. "This isn't what we wanted for you, Nina," he said, his voice harsh but tired. "We were trying to protect you from all this. You never understood the stakes." "The stakes?" I echoed, stepping forward. "What stakes, Miles? You thought erasing me, burying me, was the only way you could keep your grip on the power you've always had. You didn't want a daughter. You wanted an asset, someone who wouldn't question the system you built. But I'm not your pawn anymore." There was a long, suffocating silence as the truth hung in the air. My mother finally spoke, her voice fragile, almost broken. "Nina, please, you've made your point. It's over now. Don't you want to put this behind us? We're family." "Family?" I said, shaking my head. "Family is supposed to be there for each other, but all you ever did was use me. You didn't protect me. You erased me. You let it happen." Claire's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't move. "I didn't know how far it had gone," she whispered. "I didn't know what Miles was doing. I just thought I was doing what was best." I felt a sickening pit open in my stomach. I had spent so many years convincing myself that she cared, that maybe deep down she was trapped too. But now, the truth was clear. She had seen it, the way they'd kept me in the dark, the way they'd manipulated everything to keep control of their little empire. I turned to Lara, my voice cutting through the thick silence. "You don't get to play the victim now. You've been just as complicit as they were. You knew about all of this, and you helped." Lara's face flushed with anger. "You think you're the only one who's been through this? Do you think I wasn't used too? Do you think I wasn't just another tool in Miles's game? You're wrong. This whole thing, it's bigger than you think. And you're just throwing it all away for what? To get back at me?" "I'm not getting back at you," I said, my voice calm now but filled with finality. "I'm exposing the truth. You were just too blinded by your own ambition to see it. You stole my work, took my future, and you did it with a smile on your face because you thought no one would ever find out, but now everyone will." My mother stood up slowly, her hands trembling. "You've broken everything, Nina. Do you really want to destroy the family over this?" I looked at her, my heart heavy but resolute. "This wasn't about family, Mom. You've been telling yourself that for years, but it was always about power. Power for Miles, power for Lara, and at the cost of everyone else. I didn't destroy anything. I just made sure the truth was finally seen." Lara looked like she was about to speak again, but I cut her off. "It's over, Lara. You're done." I turned to leave, and as I did, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. There was no going back from this moment. The Carver name had been exposed for what it really was, a mask for corruption, lies, and manipulation. And as I stepped out the door, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't just walking away from them. I was walking into my own future. The closed-door ethics summit wasn't supposed to be anything like the public spectacle of the Global Defense Conference. There were no cameras, no media, no applause, just the quiet, deliberate voices of high-ranking officials, military leaders, and defense strategists who were still reeling from the revelations I had exposed. I stood at the front of the room, facing a panel of executives and military officials from various agencies. They were all business, trying to maintain their stoic facades, but I could see the unease in their eyes. They knew they had been caught, and they knew what was coming. This wasn't a fight for recognition anymore. It was a fight for truth and accountability. And I wasn't backing down. The room was dimly lit, and the only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning. I could hear the murmur of whispers as I pulled up the final presentation, the culmination of everything I had uncovered, the stolen doctrines, the hidden redactions, the cover-ups. It was all there, laid bare for them to see. I pressed a button, and the screen behind me flickered to life, showing the most damning evidence. A comparison of Laura's Carver doctrine against my original drafts, each side by side, with key sections highlighted. The images of the original memos, the stolen content, the timelines of erased names, all neatly compiled. The evidence couldn't be ignored anymore. "I've presented this to the world already," I began, my voice steady as I watched their reactions. "And you've all seen the fallout. But I'm here to make sure this doesn't just disappear into the ether. I'm here to make sure we fix this. Permanently." I glanced around the room. Every seat was filled with someone who had had a hand in what had happened, directly or indirectly. The military's dirty little secret was no longer safe. "You all knew, in one form or another, that the Carver Doctrine was based on stolen intellectual property," I said, my eyes locking with the room's senior strategist, a man who had once been one of my mentors. His face was flushed, uncomfortable. He had been part of the cover-up, and he knew it. "I know you're thinking that I'm here to destroy your legacy," I continued. "But the truth is, this isn't just about my work. This is about a system that allowed this to happen in the first place. A system that protected the powerful while erasing everyone else who got in the way." I paused, letting my words settle in the air. The room was silent, but I could feel the tension tightening, the weight of my accusation hanging over them. "This is about accountability," I said, tapping the screen to bring up a list of names. The names of officers, engineers, scientists, and strategists whose careers had been buried under the guise of efficiency. These people, my colleagues, my friends, were erased just like I was. And it was done for one reason, to protect those at the top. I turned to face the room, watching their eyes narrow. I knew I had their attention now. "I don't need your applause," I said, a cold edge to my voice. "I'm not here for your sympathy. I'm here to make sure we fix the damage that's been done. We can't just leave it at an apology or a few changes. This is about rewriting the entire doctrine system. It's about giving people their due, acknowledging their contributions, and ensuring this never happens again." I felt the eyes on me as I clicked through to the final piece of my presentation. The renaming of the Strategic Doctrine Suite, the Carver Rivers Construct. "This," I said firmly, my finger pointing to the new name, "is the future of military strategy. And it's going to have my name on it. Not Laura's, not Miles', not anyone else's who thinks they can claim credit for something they didn't do. This is the only way to make things right. This is the only way to honor the work that was stolen, and the people who were erased." There was a long silence. I could feel their resistance in the air, but I also knew the truth was on my side. They couldn't hide anymore. They couldn't sweep this under the rug like they had for years. Finally, one of the senior officers, an older man who had been silent up until now, spoke. "You know," he said slowly, his voice gravelly, "this could destroy everything. The military relies on these doctrines. Changing them now? It could throw everything into chaos." I didn't hesitate. "This is the chaos that's been brewing for years," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You've built an empire on lies, and now it's time to clean up the mess. You can keep pretending like everything's fine, but it's not. And the longer you ignore this, the worse it's going to get. You can't ignore the truth." I let that hang in the air for a moment. The officer looked down at the table, his fingers tapping in a nervous rhythm. He wasn't the only one. I could feel the collective tension in the room. The weight of the truth was heavy, suffocating. "You're right," he finally said, his voice quieter now. "We've known about these inconsistencies for a long time, and we've turned a blind eye, but this is different. You've given us no choice but to confront it." The words hung in the air for a moment, the room still heavy with uncertainty. Then one by one, the others started to speak, some reluctantly, some with a sense of resolve. "You're going to need more than just a name change," another officer said, his voice steady now. "We'll need to go through every doctrine, every file, and make sure there's nothing else like this hidden beneath the surface." "Agreed," I said, nodding. "But it starts with the Carver Rivers construct. It starts with giving credit where it's due." And it starts with acknowledging that the people who were erased are no longer invisible. There was a pause. Then another officer stood up, looking me in the eye. "Then we move forward," he said, his voice quieter, but firm. "And we rewrite the doctrine, your doctrine, and we make sure the world knows the truth." I nodded once, the feeling of victory slowly settling in. It wasn't over yet. The fight was far from done, but this was the first step toward reclaiming everything that had been stolen from me. The system was finally beginning to change. A month had passed since the summit, and things had already begun to shift in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. The doctrine had been renamed. The Carver Rivers construct was now official, the new name etched into every military document, every strategy plan, and every simulation exercise that followed. My name, once erased from existence, was now present, permanent, and undeniable. The military review boards had started auditing all the redactions as I had requested, and each audit turned up more evidence of manipulation and erasure. The voices of those who had been silenced were now being heard. The process was slow, but it was moving forward. More and more people were beginning to ask questions. And as the truth came out, I realized something important. It wasn't just about the doctrine anymore. It was about what came next. I wasn't interested in accolades, not anymore. I wasn't chasing after medals or military promotions. My victory wasn't in the recognition. It was in the idea that things could change. That this system, which had been built on lies, could be rebuilt into something better. And that meant stepping into a new role, one that I hadn't planned on. I was back at Fort Sandmore now, the place where I had first started my training. The air was crisp, the grounds expansive, and the cadets, as always, were buzzing with nervous energy. But this time, when I entered the lecture hall, the faces turned towards me weren't just those of students. I recognized some of them. They were my students now. It had been a quiet transition at first. When the military had reached out, offering me a position to teach the next generation of officers, I had hesitated. I didn't know if I was ready to take on that role, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I wasn't going to be the one to tear down the system. No, I was going to be the one to build it back up. And that meant shaping the future, not by tearing down my past, but by passing on what I had learned. I stood at the front of the classroom, the cadets still shuffling in, some eager, others uncertain. But they were all here for one reason: to learn. I picked up the stack of papers in front of me and set them down on the podium. They were the outlines for today's lesson, but my eyes drifted to the board at the front of the room, where my name was written in big, bold letters, General Nina Carver. For the first time, I didn't mind seeing it there. When the room settled, I cleared my throat and began. "Good morning, cadets," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "Today we're going to talk about something that isn't covered in the textbooks, something that isn't found in the doctrine, something that doesn't show up in any military simulation." They all leaned forward, their attention now focused on me. Some had probably expected a lesson on strategy or tactics. They were probably waiting for me to dive into the mechanics of war, but instead, I was about to teach them something far more important. Leadership, I continued, isn't just about knowing how to win a battle. It's about knowing when to ask questions. It's about having the strength to stand up when things are wrong. And more importantly, it's about recognizing when you've been part of something that isn't right and doing what you can to fix it. That's what makes a great leader. Not your rank, not your title, not your medals. It's your integrity. And it's your ability to change the course of things, even when you've been told you can't. I could feel their eyes on me, some of them unsure, others intrigued. But I knew the message was landing. I wasn't here to teach them just about military strategy. I was here to teach them about responsibility, the responsibility that came with the power they would one day wield. "History," I said, glancing at the board behind me, "will remember what you do, whether you're in the field or at the top of the command chain. But it doesn't start with the decisions you make when the stakes are highest. It starts right here, with your character, with how you conduct yourself in your everyday actions, and with the choices you make when no one's looking." I paused, letting that hang in the air for a moment. I could see the wheels turning in their heads. Some of them were starting to realize that I wasn't just giving them another lesson in theory. This was the real world, the one they were about to step into. "We don't get to choose the battles we face," I said, my voice steady, "but we do get to choose how we fight them. And the truth is, sometimes you'll be asked to fight battles you never signed up for. Battles that require more than just skill or intellect. They'll require you to question everything you know, everything you've been told, and to do what's right no matter the cost. I looked out across the room at the young faces staring back at me, their eyes full of potential, some still skeptical, others wide-eyed with ambition. But they were all here to learn, and I would make sure they learned the most important lesson of all. Don't ever forget, I added, my voice softening. The most important battle you'll face in your career is the one for your integrity. Hold on to it. Protect it. Because if you lose that, you lose everything. I looked down at my desk and picked up the stack of papers again, my hands steady. It felt like the right time to introduce the first lesson of the day, the one that had been missing from every textbook I'd ever read, the true cost of power. The cadets shuffled as I handed out the lesson plans, and the quiet hum of activity filled the room. But I stayed where I was, watching them take the first steps towards something that would shape their futures. I wasn't here for medals or recognition or even the title. I was here for them, to shape their legacy, just as my own had finally been shaped. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. As the class began, I looked out the window at the bright morning sky, knowing I had finally reclaimed my place. And this time, no one would be erasing me again.